Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity and distinct honor to present at this annual symposium. So the overarching topic of my presentation is on how best we might combine models and data to improve our understanding of the ocean. Before continuing, though, I would like to acknowledge a large number of collaborators without whom none of this would be possible. And unfortunately, I cannot name them all. But I would like to re-emphasize what we just heard from Dr. McManus, namely the fact that our scientific challenges have become so large that true collaboration and open science is becoming indispensable to make rapid and sustained progress. So climate change is fundamentally ocean change. We all, as oceanographers, probably know the numbers. Are 90% of the Earth's energy imbalance ends up as heating the ocean. About 28% of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is absorbed by the ocean, also contributing to ocean acidification. And mainly all of the water that's melting from the polar ice sheets and land ice ends up in the ocean to contribute to global sea level rise. So as a computational oceanographer, I'm concerned with the question, how can computational science contribute to a global challenge that is posed by the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And so we begin by looking at sort of the vast amount of and the explosion of data that we have over the last decade or so from the satellite altimetric record. So from the satellite record, here shown the NASA's instruments that are measuring the ocean and the Earth system, and both the current and the future planned missions. And this unprecedented explosion of Earth observation data begs the questions, is ocean science a big data science? And given what I just said, yes, we might say the answer. In addition to the data that we have from Earth observations, we're also now able to simulate the climate system with an increasing level of detail in terms of resolution, complexity, in terms of process representation. That's in the example here of simulating the coupled Arctic Ocean system at eddy permitting resolution provides us with a large amounts of data, around 10 to 100 terabytes sometimes per simulation. Another example, the CMIP6 modeling suite now comprises on the order of around 10 petabyte of simulations. And so simulations such as this conducted by my colleague Anne Nguyen here at the Odin Institute, these simulations give us access to increasingly detailed phenomena of the time-evolving state of the ocean that is consistent with our theoretical knowledge in terms of the equations of motions that we're trying to put on the computer. But these simulations are very expensive. Here a figure by my colleague Baylor Fox-Kemper that shows through the succession of IPCC reports from the first assessment report here through the most recent report AR6. A function of that is the resolution of the ocean models that have been conducted in these model simulations and the CMIP efforts. And what we see, the curve in blue here is the theoretical improvement of the model resolution that we may achieve. But in blue dots here, we see that our modeling efforts are not able to actually keep pace with the improvement in hardware and the compute infrastructure that we have. Furthermore, the ocean really covers a continuum of space and time scales, and there are scales at very small scales that are going to impact the large scale circulation, and vice versa, large scale that has an energy cascade back to the small scale. So there are significant uncertainties that remain in our modeling approaches in terms of this continuum of space scale, some of which we cannot actually currently resolve and will not be able to resolve in the coming likely 10 or perhaps even 20 years. We have uncertain inputs in these models, such as initial conditions, the boundary conditions. We have parametric and structural model uncertainties. And so the question then is what aspects of these simulations, even at what we now consider the best and highest resolution of simulations, are actually robust? And how do errors accumulate and propagate in space and time? And how do we quantify that? And so from a simulation perspective, then it is important that we have observations to ground our theory and simulations, even if with improved model resolution and process representation. So then the question is, again, is ocean science a big data science? And we might also say no, from another perspective, namely that from an observational perspective. What's shown here is the observational sampling between 1950 and about 2010 as a function of depth, the upper 2 kilometer of the water column. At the top panel here, the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, and the lower panel. And we see that up to the mid 2000s here, we have less than 10% coverage of the ocean here, and it's only since the beginning of the Argo profiling program that we begin to have a somewhat decent coverage of the upper 2 kilometer of the ocean. But keep in mind that the mean depth of the ocean is roughly 4 kilometers. So there's still a vast amount of the water column that we're actually not sampling. Also shown here on the right is that the sampling of the ocean that we now have is accentuated in the northern hemisphere, but in green you have the fraction of the global ocean volume that is actually resides in the southern hemisphere that we're perhaps not yet covering to the extent that we wish to. Another example of uncertainties is the uncertainties in the global ocean carbon CO2 sink, which becomes increasingly important to us. The left panel here shows two sampling strategy of the surface ocean CO2 atlas, or SOCAT, two different sampling strategies here by the MPI, SOM, FEM, and to the right here by the Carboscope. They're sampling the sampling strategies, they're sampling the same model outputs. So we know that they should, in this modeling world, they should give us the same result, but they have very, very large differences in terms of their sampling strategy. The right panel, also from a very recent paper by Bürger, Zeng, and McKinley, shows the number of unique observations per month. Again, in the PCO2 data, which shows significant amounts of areas not even sampled and large amounts of the ocean only sampled at certain seasons of the year. So we have two incomplete knowledge reservoirs, the one from an eclectic, patchy, and heterogeneous global ocean observing system, and then the other from numerical models that require uncertain input. The question is, can we optimally combine these two incomplete knowledge reservoirs? And can we do so in a manner that provides useful for specifically climate analysis? And the reason why I'm emphasizing climate here is what we want to do is we want to use the data for causal and dynamical attribution of the changes that we're observing. And often we want to actually detect small residual signals of changes, for example, that are residing in a very noisy system. And can we provide measures of uncertainty with those? And can we use simulations to perhaps inform efficient observing strategies given the complexities in designing such observing systems and the cost and logistical challenges? The answer to this one answer to this may be data assimilation. And I'm giving here a very nice definition of data assimilation by colleague Kaminsky et al. That says that ideally all observational data streams are going to be interpreted simultaneously with the process information provided by the model, which then leads to a consistent picture of the state of the system that balances all of the observational constraints, taking into account all the respective uncertainty ranges. Or another definition by Steve Penny is that the data assimilation allows information provided from the observations to be propagated in time and space to unobserved areas using the dynamics and the physical constraints imposed by the numerical model. So realizing, or first sort of thinking about such a system is that maybe around 40 years ago, in this cartoon that's been drawn by Carl Wunsch on the occasion of Walter Mang's 65th birthday symposium, where we see here a number of observing systems that were at the horizon that the community was hoping to be online one day. To the left here, tomography, the prospect of satellite data, altimetry, scattorometry, and other types of data, the shipborne observations, and then in situ measurements, all providing very different types of observations, and the idea of three-dimensional circulation model that provides this unifying framework. So one way, and this has been realized today, is through an global ocean state estimation effort here, the estimating the circulation and climate of the ocean, or ECCO, that is in fact synthesizing these heterogeneous data streams here at the top, gravity, satellite gravimetry, altimetry data, passive microwave data, and then to the right, data from the Argo profiling float program, the Go ship arrays, XPT data, and most maybe exotically elephant seal data that provide us with temperature salinity data in regions where we basically have no other means to even going. And so this type of data assimilation system is learning from the most complete set of available ocean observations and known physics or dynamics that is encapsulated in the model, solving a gigantic least squares model data misfit problem. And the way how we solve it here is through what's called an adjoint or Lagrange multiplier method. But now the question becomes, what do we mean by learning? And I'd like here to propose an experiment in which I'm trying to unify a number of different approaches of data science and estimation methods and see whether I can combine this within a unified framework to give us a sense of how we are approaching these different approaches, but how they may actually all fit together in this sort of maybe overarching framework. So we have here in blue a physical model that requires uncertain inputs. These uncertain inputs could be the initial conditions with which we initialize the model, surface boundary conditions in the form of ARC fluxes, but then also a number of parametrization schemes in which we capture both constitutive or empirical laws or separate scale parameterizations. And so the questions is, again, bringing back the notion of uncertain inputs here. There's a number of ways in how we could look at the learning problem. The first one is one that you may not have thought about right now, but it's actually the learning of the surface ARC fluxes if we have, or if we had very good observations of the ocean interior. If we do so, we could actually invert for ARC fluxes that are basically in agreement with the basically simulated state of the ocean as simulated. And an example very concretely here is that of inversion for surface fluxes of CO2 that could be inverted for by the availability of interior measurements of the carbon cycle. Now, another way in how we can think about the learning is learning the initial conditions that we require to do optimal forecasts. And this in the framework of optimal estimation control theory is such that we are looking for, we have in red here a cartoon of a forecast of a model that gives us a certain state in black. And then in red here, this red cross gives us a new set of observations that come in, and the initialization or the filtering problem or the practice in numerical weather prediction is find an optimal new initial condition that will then initialize a new forecast to the next state until we then come to a new state, at which point we reinitialize the model to have the optimal forecast for the next state. This is an extrapolation or prediction problem, and we should contrast this to another problem, which is maybe called a smoothing problem, namely that of finding an optimal, using the model to interpolate between an optimal state of the time evolving system, and which may be used for reconstructing or interpolating the past state of the ocean as best as we can. So unlike what I showed before in the filtering problem, these curves in red, what we like to have here is the curve in blue, where we would like to have a trajectory that most exactly fulfills the time evolving solution of the ocean circulation. And because this encapsulates the way and how we understand the evolution, for example, at vective timescale of heat anomalies or freshwater anomalies in the system. So this is a smoothing problem of estimation and control, and the algorithmic challenges and problems approaches that we use here will not be necessarily the same ones as the ones that are used for prediction. Another way that we may think about learning is we would like to understand, have a best estimate of these parameters. So we would like to, these are uncertain because of constitutive laws that are empirical and subgrid scale parameterizations. And this basically amounts to a model calibration problem. So can we use observations in an optimal manner to tune and calibrate ocean models and climate models? So this becomes the parameter estimation problem, or we might learn from parameters. Now, very recently, in the last few years, the advent of machine learning has asked the question is, can we use, or can we replace some of these uncertain and potentially computationally very expensive parameterization scheme by surrogate models, for example, neural networks, and train these neural networks offline using high fidelity data to then plug those into the model to improve model simulations in that way. And some of these, the hope is here to, for example, improve model biases. And the example here in what's called an a priori or offline learning is the use of machine learning to basically estimate a source term in our governing equation that is represented by such a neural network through the use of a high resolution, for example, eddy resolving simulations that then calibrate the subgrid scale parameterization that we can then plug into the model. We could look at the problem potentially more exhaustively and saying, well, not only do you want to train or calibrate this one parameterization scheme by a neural network, but we would like to train the entire model on the observational data that we have as well. And so this goes under the notion of a posteriori or full model or online or end-to-end learning, where not only individual schemes within the model will be trained, but we also want to take advantage of the observations to see that the full model that is then being run also fulfills the observed quantities. And then the most extreme, in some ways, approach is to completely replace the physical model by a surrogate model, for example, again, a neural network, and use, again, high fidelity simulations, or use what are called reanalysis products to feed those into the model, and then to, again, have a neural network that can then use to replace the physical model. Now, a key aspect that I'd like to make here is that there is a unifying computational framework to learn from the data that permeates all of what I've just shown. And if we go back here, all of these points in red, here the neural network weights, or the neural network scheme within the model, or the parameterization schemes, the parameters that we're learning, or the initial condition that we're learning, or the surface boundary conditions that we're learning, can all be achieved through gradient-based optimization that is shown here. And the languages are quite different in sort of inverse methods and machine learning, but the underlying conceptual framework, so the one is where we invert, we seek the find gradient-based optimization to seek the uncertain inputs, or we seek the neural network weights. This is one approach of how we can do this, is through what's called either an adjoint method in inverse methods or back propagation in machine learning. But these two are mathematically, conceptually, essentially, yes, they're the same thing. And so an intermediate point here that I'd like to make is that the data assimilation is much more than its use in numerical weather prediction, where it's focused on just learning or an initial condition estimation problem, but it has a much broader remit. And second is that there are conceptually very strong similarities between scientific machine learning and basically these methods that I've just highlighted of optimal estimation and control. And third, I'd like to also make the point here that the physics-based model remain key for neural network training. And I'd like to emphasize this by bringing two examples of what the first example here is for the look at sort of the question is how high fidelity are actually high fidelity simulations. And I'd like to give a cautionary tale here with a study that a colleague, Maslow and colleagues have conducted in 2020. What they have done is on the left here, lower left in panel A here, you see the vertical velocity variance at 500 meters from a global simulation of an ocean model here in the Pacific off the coast of California here. To the right, panel B is a model that has been configured exactly the same as the left. It is the MIT GCM in the 2-kilometer resolution. The only difference is that this model on the right is run in what's called the regional configuration where open boundaries are being used to force the model. And what we see here is that the model on the left, the regional model, is missing a lot of energy or variance that is contained in the left model. And we see that the variance in the left model at high frequencies is roughly the right one. If we compare this in frequency space here, we have high frequencies here to the right. And in black, we have an Mbari mooring that basically allows us to gauge the fidelity of the model. We see that the global model does a good job at representing those high frequency scales, but two regional models that are forced with open boundary conditions basically have a rapid drop off of these frequencies, of these high frequencies, both the regional configuration of the MIT GCM and the regional configuration of the WOMS model. So we have to be careful, even if we are running a high fidelity model at high resolution, we may not capture processes that may propagate into the domain, but are not actually well captured by the open boundary conditions. I also would like to caution when we use reanalysis products, reanalysis are not observations, and they're often also not dynamically consistent. Two examples that I'm showing here on the left, the recent study by Norman Loeb et al. Trying to infer the Earth energy imbalance in an ocean reanalysis, and these are two cycles. The Aura S5 is the ECMWF ocean reanalysis, and then a new product, the Aura P6, shows a conspicuous dip here in the Earth energy imbalance anomaly at around 2005. That is very likely due to the insertion of new types of observations, and these observations are the Argo observations. And the authors of that study conclude that one of the greatest challenges in reanalysis is how to balance the temporal consistency of the model simulation with the increased accuracy of state estimation in data-rich periods. Another cautionary tale to the right here is from an operational forecasting system off the coast of Australia here, where we see in these red stars is the day of which assimilation occurs. Whenever basically new data are inserted, we have analysis increments leads to these spurious increases in the vertical velocity component of these ocean states. And this, of course, is very concerning. For example, if we wish to drive these products for forcing ocean biogeochemical models where the vertical velocity is a very important component of basically moving the biology to and away from the surface. So I would like to now go into this sort of the big challenge that I pointed to before is the full model learning. So the integration of surrogate modeling training or machine learning within full model calibration or the data assimilation framework. And so what I'm like to propose here is that the way on how we do this is that the surrogate models or machine learning models that have adopted or that work so well because they have adopted this notion of differentiable programming or differentiable simulators. And we would like to extend this differentiability to the full model, to the physical model itself. So extending this notion of differentiable programming to the full physical model, which then enable us to really conduct sort of this full model, end-to-end model calibration. And this relies on general purpose automatic differentiation to develop and to create these differentiable models. And one effort to basically achieve this is through a recently funded effort on the NSF called DJ for Earth on the convergence of Bayesian inverse methods and scientific machine learning through universal differentiable programming. We are targeting here a Julia-based climate model that is underway with the Climate Modeling Alliance. The reason why we choose Julia is we'd like to leverage the efforts that are going on within this Climate Modeling Alliance, and also leverage efforts in the Julia community to pay serious attention to differentiable programming. And third, using Julia as a language that potentially is much better able to harness next generation compute hardware and compute architectures, for example, GPUs. Enzyme is a tool, an automatic differentiation tool that is being developed as part of this project with some incredible and talented young investigators that I'm listing here. On the right, And we have several flagship applications in this endeavor, namely one, the ocean component of the system model, the sea ice component, and an ice sheet model. I'd like to conclude with just a hint on how we may use the derivative information and derivative-based uncertainty quantification and put this together with optimal observing system design. Just very briefly, origins of uncertainty within the context of estimation theory, of data assimilation, they are varied, right? So we have uncertainties in the observations that are both measurement uncertainty, irregular sampling in space and time. We have model uncertainty, that could be parametric or structural uncertainties. We have the assimilation system itself. It's very complex machinery, and so we may actually have approximations to the full data assimilation. The way how we ingest observations to a data assimilation system. As I've shown, we have uncertain boundary conditions, which could be external forcings, the bathymetry of the system, natural boundary conditions, scenarios in the context of climate modeling, and then finally we can use prior knowledge, but again with its uncertainties. And what makes uncertainty quantification so difficult is, again, the spatio-temporally irregular sampling of the observation, especially in the ocean and especially in the ocean interior. The parametric uncertainty, where sometimes we talk about the curse of dimensionality. So for a parameter space of order n, the uncertainty problem becomes one of n squared. And so quickly this becomes a very large problem. And then, of course, the issue of structural uncertainty within the model. The question is, how do we capture those in the model? Do we absorb them in the parameter estimation? And again, neural networks, machine learning help us out in terms of surrogate models, and stochastic approaches help us to capture those uncertainties. One approach that I'd like to highlight here is, again, the use of derivative information to make progress to provide sort of a comprehensive uncertainty quantification. Basically, what we want to do, so we are minimizing through this cost function J, the model data misfit, and thinking geometrically what Hessian-based or uncertainty quantification means is that we have a direction in our uncertainty space where the curvature, which is the second derivative, is very large of the misfit. What that means is that changing our uncertain parameter by a unit amount changes J quite strongly, and so the curvature is very large. That means that the cost function is very well constrained by the observation in this direction versus another direction where the curvature is very weak. And that means is that even large changes in the parameter will not give us a large change in the cost function, and therefore we say that in this direction the observations are not very informative on the of the uncertainties. And so now we can think of the information that is provided by the observations. We can quantify this. We can also think about observations that are required by a quantity of interest. So a quantity not directly captured by the observing system, but perhaps an observation that is capturing something like a transport through some sections here, for example, across Denmark Strait or the Scotland-Iceland Bridge. We have no time to go into this, but I just want to highlight the use of this uncertainty propagation framework that we are developing in the context of the overturning in the subpolar North Atlantic program or OSNAP program. I'd like to highlight two studies by Nora Losa et al. In JGR 2020 and 2021, where she is exploring these methods for trying to come up with a quantitative observing system design for arrays such as the OSNAP array. So I'd like to conclude here with the notion that, and with a quote by Rüde et al. In 2018, that computational science and engineering is an essential driver for progress in science and application, where experimental or observational approaches are very costly, very slow, very dangerous, or impossible. And what better to exemplify this as in the Arctic, where really many of these issues still apply, and where potentially computational approaches may help us to make some progress. So we are looking at sort of, since the advent of sort of computing sort of at 6 decades of the computational science and engineering, with these pillars of forward simulations, physics-based forward simulation, the concepts and machinery developed by optimization and inverse methods, uncertainty quantification, and then very recently, scientific machine learning. The question is, how do we bring together these concepts, and how do we harness the explosion of the data from both observations and modeling to extract knowledge and insight? And what I'd like to propose here is to bridge some of these concepts and what I've talked about of big data science versus sparse data science, computer science and computational science, and scientific machine learning versus simulation-based science. One approach here is the use of differentiable programming and differentiable simulators, the use of general purpose automatic differentiation. And to do this really requires sustained collaboration between all of this community, computational scientists, computer scientists, and domain scientists, and that includes both modelers and observationalists. And with that, I'm conclude and happy to take questions. Thank you.